So basically the way this works is you can talk about whatever you would like to talk about until we get questions for you from the email. So yeah, thank you for doing this. It's so great.
Oh my God, you guys are awesome for organizing this.
In 5 days.
Seriously,
it's been an adventure.
No, it's so incredible. And like, I can't believe how many people you have signed up. It's really like, honestly, it's really impressive. And like, I was telling Haley, like, don't discount this as an experience that you need. You know, it sucks that you have to like constantly sell yourself. Like, you want a grant, you got to tell them why you're the person to do it. But like, it really matters. And like, this is like incredible outreach. It's for a good cause. You know, it's really awesome.
Like, the only failing I think we have is that we could have had more guests and hosts of color. But given how stressful the situation is for everyone right now, it makes sense that the last minute nature of the event made that harder to do. So we're hoping that this will be successful enough that we can do it again and have more people of color the second time.
Yeah, no, it's hard, honestly. It's so hard right now for everyone. In the ecology, evolution, and behavior department, there's like this big discussion going on about structural racism and like people, like a lot of the grad students have complained that faculty are not contributing, and it's like, yeah, because faculty have kids. Like, I get only a couple hours every day to do anything without my toddler screaming. So
right, like, this has to be a group effort, not
right.
an individual effort.
Yeah, it's really hard for everyone to do everything. And like, you know, especially in paleo, like everyone's field seasons are like canceled, and so people are trying to use the time wisely, but it's really hard.
Right.
Because everyone's got kids at home.
Yeah, that, gotta love that this is still COVID time. I mean, that's why the protests started, right? Because of the systematic racism in our healthcare system affecting people of color, especially Black people, more in terms of survival rates from COVID, which is just horrifying when you see the numbers.
Well,
like, I think
what's really disturbing to me is how many people think it's about something they're doing or about genetics, and it's not. It's simply socioeconomic factors, and that if you have a comorbidity, you're going to have more of a problem with COVID. And African Americans disproportionately have untreated medical conditions.
Yep.
Especially in the northern cities that have already been affected. And I do think that we might see some of that discrepancy come down now that it's affecting the South, and that there's a lot of poor white people with the same problems. But like, I can't believe, apparently a GOP senator in Ohio, a doctor, an emergency room doctor, said yesterday, well, maybe the colored people aren't washing their hands as much. And I was just like, oh, someone take his medical license away. Like, it's just, it's shocking. And it's really hard when you realize how much of a problem there is. And like, you think it's just something that's dying out, and, you know, academia has its problems, but for the most part, it's pretty progressive. And at least in anthropology, people are very aware of what problems there are and the systematic biases that exist. Right. But even within that, to see there are people that don't get it is really disturbing.
In paleontology, most people are aware that the problem exists. And honestly, the wonderful response we've been seeing from the community in response to this stream and just trying to do better is great. But we still have less than 1% of people who identify as paleontologists being Black.
Yeah.
Which is horrible.
Yeah.
It needs to be fixed.
It's a big issue. It's a big issue in biological anthropology because we study human variation. Obviously, all the fossils are in Africa. And some African countries are really good at making sure that their people are coming up, and like there are very, very prominent African paleoanthropologists, but there aren't really any prominent Black American paleoanthropologists. And to me, it really is like a scientific issue too, because moving forward in science, you have to have some creativity, and like your experiences growing up and like the things that you learn influence how you think about the world and how you think about science. And we literally are missing the viewpoints of all those people because they're not in the they're not in the field with us. And so one of the things that we feel like in biological anthropology and in anthropology in general is like making sure like high school kids know what anthropology is, because if you don't, you won't know to take a class in it in college. And I'm sorry, okay, I get dinosaurs are cool, but hominins are cool. So
we're fine. We're not here to fight. This is not inter-community fighting.
So it really is important to keep these people in the system, and like we need to increase their numbers, not just because that's the right thing to do and like we should be diverse, because literally we're missing out on the scientific viewpoints that could move the field forward in so many important ways.
Absolutely. Like the thing that people, I think the thing that people are kind of ignoring is the fact that we cannot not bring our bias into our science, which means that we need to have all points of view. Like the big thing I see from people who are out of touch with the current problem is it shouldn't matter who someone doing science is because it should be unbiased, but that's just functionally not what happens.
Yeah, because people, I mean, so I am really blessed in that I just finished a PhD and my husband has a real job and I can keep writing and publishing and trying to get a tenure track position, where most people are not in that position, and they will leave academia because they don't have a choice. And so there's all these ways that the way we work right now is just not doing enough to help disadvantaged people. And then not only that, but there's also, just beliefs about what a scientist is and who is a scientist. And one of the things that I have been really focused on is making sure that people understand that, like, you might have bad grades in high school. That doesn't mean you're going to have bad grades in college, because there's a big difference. And then even if you have like poor grades in college, it should not be a barrier to wanting to do research. And like, there are tons of researchers out there who need help, who I've had so many interns and I desperately needed them, that it's doing the research, and it's really about perseverance. But in order to have perseverance, you actually have to be able to afford it and have the emotional support and the mental support and the financial support to keep going.
Absolutely.
Which was a big issue for me. My PhD took 12 years. I had some issues, medical issues, and then just also applying for grants multiple times before you get them. And that's just part of science. And I think that, the more we work on making sure people know that scientists can be anybody, like anybody can be a scientist, I think that will help get diversity ranks up. But really, it's about knowing that this topic exists, and that we have this big gap where kids know about paleontology, and then they get to school and it's never covered, and then they forget about it. And we can't magically make PhD students. We have to keep people into it throughout their lives.
Right, absolutely. I also just feel like not only making sure people know that scientists can be anybody, but just one of the big things that people of color have been telling me about, like how they feel like they haven't had opportunities in these fields, is they aren't given opportunities and they aren't given funds, which is something we all face, but it disproportionately affects them. And I feel like we have to be active in creating funds and opportunities for people of color specifically.
I think I know that one of the things that the University of Minnesota Anthropology Department has done is had like outreach to like HBCUs and have students come from HBCUs to like tour the U and get to know the department. Especially because lots of smaller colleges don't have necessarily a biological anthropologist on staff, even though it's super cool stuff.
Absolutely. Especially because like studying the evolution of humans is something that we all should have a vested interest in, because we're all human.
Because we're all human. You'd think it's very obvious. But yeah, I mean, I do sometimes want to tell, like, especially freshmen that are taking our intro course to human evolution, be like, this is the coolest stuff you will ever learn. Like, it's literally like, where did we come from and who we are? And there's just so much in biological anthropology to even contain it in a single intro class. And so it's really hard to balance out, you know, how much do we talk about primates? How much do we talk about fossils? How much do we talk about modern human variation? Yeah, and so a lot of my research is sort of literally at the intersection of that, because I use modern baboons and chimpanzees at Gombe National Park to really understand what's happening with fossil hominins. And Gombe is this like really unique site where Louis Leakey in like the 50s was at Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, and he's digging up fossils and he finds, you know, this crazy Zinjanthropus, the Nutcracker man, and he's wondering like, what is the site like? And they knew it was, you know, next to a lake that doesn't exist there now, but it was a lake. And so he had heard about these chimpanzees that lived along a lakeshore in like this woodland, grassland, forest environment. And so he sent Jane Goodall, who was his secretary at the time, who had no experience, she just really liked animals, sent her, she went with her mother, it's like 1960, and she just sat down on a hillside and started watching chimpanzees. And so it's a really great landscape. And now that we're able to reconstruct a lot of hominin landscapes, we know that Gombe is a really good match for what we think hominins were living in. They lived in like, a lot of hominins are found in these super mosaic sites where you've got some forest, you've got grassland, you've got woodland in between them, and usually the forest is because of a river or a lake. And so I sort of use Gombe National Park as a model of what hominins were doing. And so I use stable isotopes, which are basically, you know, versions of an element with different neutrons than normal. So everyone's heard of like carbon-14. It is unstable and decays, but there's carbon-12 and then there's carbon-13. There's just a little bit of 13 and a lot of 12, but the difference, the ratio of 12 to 13 in substances varies. And so there's a systematic difference between all the foods that come from trees and herbs and shrubs are all use what we call C3 photosynthesis, and it is really does not like to use any carbon-13 molecules at all. Whereas all the tropical grasses use a lot more 13C. And so that gets incorporated into your body when you're eating. You literally are what you eat.
Right.
And so I can use that, and I'm, you know, we know what the baboons and chimpanzees are eating at Gombe because people have been following them, in the chimpanzees case, for 60 years. And so we have individuals where we know what day they were born, or approximately what day, we know when they died, and we know what they were eating in between those two time periods. And so we can look at I look at their hair, their nails, their bone collagen, bone appetite, tooth enamel appetite, to sort of understand what they were eating and how much C3 versus C4 they're eating and what the actual isotopic signatures are. And by understanding how it gets incorporated in the body, we can better understand how to do it in the hominid.
So we have our first question. It's from audience member Chidumebi. He says, as a teacher of a lot of Black and Indigenous POC interested in paleontology, I have heard them tell me how they want to be a paleontologist, but their parents dissuade them because of the college costs that would be involved, and not all of these Black and Indigenous people of color students have the financial resources. What advice could Chidumebi give them that could allow them to pursue their love of paleontology in ways that won't harm their own or their parents' wallets because their parents push them to go for more financially lucrative studies?
That's a great question. And I think one of the key things is to understand that there's a big difference between quantitative data and qualitative data, where one is like you're measuring things and counting things and it's all numbers. And most of what paleontologists do nowadays is quantitative. And that is what businesses want. They want people who can understand quantitative data. And so even when you're taking classes in paleontology and earth sciences or anthropology that no business is looking for someone who does that. I think it's important to remember that a lot of the skills that students learn, businesses are looking for, like understanding Excel, understanding how to do statistics in R or SAS or Python. Almost everyone now needs to know some amount of programming to do whatever research they're doing. And not only that, but just having the critical thinking skills is, the problem right now is that a lot of businesses want someone with a business degree, but I think that once you get your foot in the door, having a broader base, especially science education, takes you further, because you can analyze data, you can, synthesize that data, explain it to people, and those are really important skills. And so one of the things that I always suggest to students, even the students that are coming to me and being like, oh, I want to go into bioanth, I want to go get my PhD, I'll be like, hey, think about how else you can get a job, because academia is in trouble right now, and they're not hiring all the things. But the thing is that a lot of the things we do are super hireable, especially all the data handling stuff we do.
Right.
Yeah.
That is very true. We have another question from Haley, who's one of our hosts. What first got you interested in biological anthropology?
So I read a book from the public library when I was 9 years old called Traces of Life. And each chapter was like, half a chapter was like this fictional story of what the species like Lucy was doing. And like how, like, and it's just like, it's like a fantasy. It's a fantasy world essentially. And then the other half was all the cool stories of how people went and found these fossils in the middle of nowhere. And that was it. I was like, okay, I'm gonna be a paleoanthropologist. And here I am. I'm not gonna say how many years later, because it's
it happens. Yeah, that's something I want to say to anyone who's watching who's interested in getting a PhD. People are going to give you numbers like 5 or 6 years. Those numbers are lies.
Those numbers are optimistic. If you get a grant the first time you apply for one, if you get a project that you love and you can do it right away, that might be normal. But so for example, I was told that I would never get permission to do destructive analyses on the Gombe chimpanzees. These are not just chimpanzees. This is Flo. This is Hugo. This is Flint. They have names, and people are very attached to them. And so I actually stopped working on this project, worked on something else for a year and a half, and then this fell back in my lap and I was able to do it. So yeah, PhD programs can be much longer than you think they're going to be.
Haley wanted a reconfirmation of the book that you were talking about earlier.
Called Traces of Life, and I have a copy somewhere, not here, but it was a great book. And there's Jeremy De Silva is a paleoanthropologist who I know has thought about writing a similar book, because he wrote this really great fictional story about this one fossil that we know had a broken ankle and it never healed. And so I was like, oh my God, you need to write a book just like this, because that was it. It was a book from the public library.
Yeah, but libraries are such good resources.
Yes, public library, and like the librarians are really good. They have usually degrees in being a librarian and will help you find whatever research you're looking for. And most nowadays are like, will be able to find you books that aren't at your library that you might be able to look at online. Yeah, libraries are thankfully still something the public supports.
Right. Like when you're talking to your students of color who are interested in science, point them to the library, because even I grew up in a somewhat privileged background, lower middle class background, and even I had access to books at my library, and that was a big part in learning about dinosaurs and paleontology for me. So especially in cities where you have these giant libraries with tons of resources, there's so many things for you guys to look at. And the online community, you are correct. The internet is free and has lots of stuff.
Oh my, I honestly, I kind of wish I could go back and like take all my intro science classes like chem and calc now, because there's so much help online.
Watching Crash Course and being like, where were you when I took physics?
Yeah,
Frustrating.
yeah. Khan Academy, thank you.
Yeah.
It turns out I do use calculus in my everyday life. Who knew?
Right. I just,
Turns out you calculate isotopes by measuring the area under a curve.
there you go. Who knew that would be useful? Thanks, Isaac Newton, I guess. Unless there is a culture that invented calculus before Newton that we don't know about because of white supremacy. If that's true, let me know in the comments so that I can educate myself. I'm like, I know a lot of cultures that figured things out before white people did. Not sure about calculus. Like, did you know Hindu culture, certain African myths, um, Islamic studies, Chinese studies, and the Jewish Talmud all have theories of evolution in them.
Yes, so when people say they don't believe in evolution, it's like, well, then what, which creation myth there are 2 different creation myths in Genesis itself.
Yep. We talk about that. I'm Jewish, so we talk about how those are stories. High five!
Jews represented.
Shabbat shalom, by the way.
Yeah, Shabbat shalom.
I'm not Shomer. So yeah, there's so many different.
Clearly not Shomer.
Right, like I'm on the computer. That ship is sailed. So yeah. What other questions do we have, guys? Yeah, I also wish Crash Course would do like Crash Course African history. Because right now all they have, this is getting out of hand now, or 2 of them. Thanks, Joshua. Yeah, I also wish they would do that. Do we have more questions from the chat? I'm sorry. We just gotta. I don't have a question. I just want to say, as an educator of young children in Chicago, I love that you all are doing this. Thank you, Patrick. I'm in Chicago. We should talk sometime.
I'm up the highway. I'm in Madison right now.
Nice. I'm sorry you live in Wisconsin.
I don't. I live in Minneapolis, but my in-laws live in Wisconsin, and they're helping with my daughter.
Mazel tov. Minneapolis is better.
Minneapolis, I think the COVID rate's going to increase a bit. So we've been
talking.
March.
Yeah. The mayor of Chicago just decided that we're going to open back up restaurants, and I'm sitting here like, no, we're not. We shouldn't be. This is a terrible idea. Please don't. Anyway, so do we have more questions from the audience? If not that, we have someone emailing a question now. Fantastic. Because the more questions, the merrier. Manly, while we are waiting, if you would like to share any more stories about your adventures in biological anthropology.
So one of the craziest things is that Gombe is on a lake. So Gombe, you cannot get to Gombe by car. I am deathly terrified of deep water. I cannot swim to save my life, and I get extremely seasick even in cars. And it turns out the only way to get to Gombe is by boat. And honestly, if I had known that I had to take a boat, I would not have chosen this project. Like, it's a good thing that I had already started like applying for grants before I realized that like there really was no way to get there other than
right.
And it's
I'm so sorry.
like sometimes it's like Lake Tanganyika is beautiful. Like it's it is at Gombe, the lake is crystal clear. You can snorkel and see all kinds of like cichlid fish and like look down and see like they're the fish that make like the weird nest in the sand where they make designs, and it is gorgeous. And so sometimes the lake is absolutely gorgeous, but the first time I went, I'm like in the boat with like my advisor, Michael Wilson, and then the head of chimpanzee research, Deus Majungu, and like and Anton Collins, who's like the head of the baboon research, and then all these like, you know, local assistants. And it is like storming and apparent, and like the lake is like in white caps, and I am just like, thank God it was raining so that people couldn't tell that I just had tears running down my face the entire boat ride. And like like Mike had since said that it probably was one of the worst boat rides he's had, and he like lived there for a year and took a boat every week to go back and forth from town. And so it was like I I had talked to I had like scopamine for like the nausea, and I had like these ginger chews, and I had the C-bands on, and I was like, my eyes peeled to the rise, and I made a special like mixtape to like listen to, and it was like honestly like and it took hours. It was hours. The boat's like underpowered, and the waves are big, and it was not a great beginning. And then I get to Gombe, and in like 10 minutes there are chimpanzees in camp, and you are like, a couple meters away from a chimp, and you're just like, oh, that's a chimpanzee. Maybe we should have some sort of, I don't know, cage between us.
I admire your ability to weather that situation, truly, as someone who gets seasick. And I'm so sorry. But hey, a chimp happened. That's fun.
Yeah, it's a good story.
We do have another question from Chidumebi. What was the question? I'm trying to find it. How do you tackle the difficulty of trying to discuss paleontology to cultures or governments that have a religious objection to paleontology? As obviously, we've established that's not every religious tradition, but it is a good number of them.
I mean, it really is tough, and I've been meaning to read more about this. A friend of mine who actually works at Gombe, who worked at Gombe, works for the American Academy of Advancement of Science, Association of Advancement of Science. He works on a team that is all about talking to cultures about science that don't necessarily, aren't very scientific or don't believe in evolution. And so there are resources out there. My thing is that, especially, as a Jew, it's like, well, I don't know what a day is to God. I don't know, we don't know, might think. And right. It's so, but it is really hard. It's really hard to deal with students or people that don't believe in it, but even people who don't believe in evolution or don't like fossils are still really interested in like what monkeys do or what apes do and how they're like us and how they're not like us. Right. And so there are always common ground ways to approach things. And luckily, I also do some stuff with like living primates. And it's just, so in that case, I would focus more on how we are similar to animals and how, even if you don't believe that if you believe there's a split between humans and animals, you can still see aspects of humanity in, especially the great apes and other like higher primates like monkeys, and especially in terms of animal welfare and the idea that these animals have emotions, they have feelings, they feel the same way we do, although they are clearly can take more pain. I mean, some of the baboon skeletons are unbelievably beat up, and these animals take a licking and they keep on ticking. They just keep going. Yeah, it's focusing more on what makes us the same instead of what makes us different.
Right. That makes sense. We have a question that was phrased kind of weird, so we're currently trying to figure out how to rephrase it. Sorry about that. So speaking of the fact that we are closer to groups of animals than many cultures want to admit, how distant in human evolution could you actually have successful hybridization? Like we know that humans mixed with Neanderthals and Denisovians and everything, but yeah. How much further?
So that is a really good question. They're actually so I've started to think of human evolution and the human ancestor sort of. It's definitely not a tree. It looks like more like a bush, and I've started to think of it more as like a ring species where one population can mate with another population, but it can't mate with two populations down the line. Right. And there definitely is hybridization. So chimpanzees and humans can't hybridize because we actually have a chromosomal difference, and so that we have more one more chromosome than chimpanzees because one split in half.
Right.
But I definitely think, humans, we know that humans were probably hybridizing with Neanderthals, mating with Neanderthals. Neanderthals were mating with Denisovans. Denisovans were mating with humans. A lot of the genetics, though, one of the big questions is how far back does that go? And is what looks like Neanderthal mating, is it actually everyone sharing a common ancestor further?
Right.
So could we be sharing a species like Homo antecessor or Heidelbergensis? There are paleoanthropologists out there that think we need to rename everything Homo erectus, that after Homo erectus, everything's mating with each other. And if you can mate successfully, then you aren't, then that's the end. That's the species concept, is that you can only mate with other members of your species. And if it turns out you can mate with some other member, then the species that ends. And so it could be that we all are just Homo erectus. I don't think I'm going to go that, I would not go that far yet, but I definitely now think of us as ring species, where we probably mated Neanderthals. Neanderthals mated with Denisovans. Denisovans mated with like other Asian Homo sapiens or Homo erectus in Asia. And that, it just keeps going in this big loop. So we're a bushy loop species.
Right. That is a fantastic place for us to wrap up because we have our next guest on standby right now. But thank you so much for coming on. It's been great to talk to you about everything.
Oh my goodness, my pleasure. It was super fun.
Right. Thank you so much. So we're going to transition to our next guest. Thank you so much. And I hope you'll watch more of the stream during your
Enjoy
weekend.
your Juneteenth, everybody.
Happy Juneteenth.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.